So I can tell that at the beginning I said get to know people and have some fun. I think you're doing way too much of that already. Too much fun is being had. So we're going to get started with the second session. And the main issue here is that we're standing between you all and lunch, so I will try to keep us on time so that we'll spend an hour for this panel, and we have two talks, so we'll spend about 15 to 18 minutes on the talks and have the similar structure with Q&A, a short Q&A session after the first paper, a short Q&A after the second paper, and then we'll have time for a more general discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Kaylyn and Daniel. They're tag teaming.
All right. Thanks so much, Michael, and to the organizers. Really great to see some friendly faces and to learn work from new people. The first panel was already a blast. So I'm Jackson-Schiff. Kaylyn and I will be tag teaming this presentation, which should be fun. And this is work with our really talented PhD candidate, Christina Walker, a colleague Natalia Bueno at Emory, and a colleague, JP Messina, who's in philosophy also at Purdue. So we talked about dislocation and disruption and disaffection, and it wouldn't be an AI workshop unless we talked a little bit about deepfakes. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so you all will know the basic story here, but we've now sort of opened the floodgates potentially to hyper-realistic text, audio, image, video content. The audio is there. Adobe just announced they're going to be rolling this out in their platforms soon. We have Sora from OpenAI. And we've been concerned about the political implications, including the kind of indirect implications, for about 5 years now. We started to see real-world harms, including tracking of different incidents, or at least risk of incidents such as political interference or threats against vulnerable or minority groups. This deepfake of bombing at the Pentagon led to a dip in the stock market, so kind of empirical harm here. And we've been sort of tracking these kinds of incidents as well. We've seen, in addition to the sort of sexual abuse content, economic fraud, uses in the political sphere. So critiquing political figures, usually focused on reputational harm, accusing politicians of scandals, alleging something as a deepfake when it may actually be real. So different uses and counter uses. And now we're approaching our election, right? This is the biggest election year in history, I think. And we've seen this in Slovakia, in India, and certainly in the US. So just to situate us and for the video, we had 2 days ago, Taylor Swift endorsed Kamala Harris, and in her endorsement message, she flagged that she was bothered that Trump had posted deepfakes of her on Truth Social saying that Swifties support me. So that at least appeared to lead to some kind of backlash that may also have an empirical effect. So as I mentioned, we've been looking at impacts on political accountability, trust in the informational ecosystem. So how does this affect people's sense of truth, sense of trust in different types of institutions, including media? And this has led us to build something we call the Political Deepfakes Incidents Database. This is building off of recent work in AI incidence tracking, so different types of AI harms. So we built something specifically for deepfakes, for cheap fakes or shallow fakes, and for stories that people allege might be deepfakes, even if they're actually real content. We want to track all of these sort of socially salient political incidents. So we're tracking who's sharing them, who are the targets, what are the ostensible communication goals, what are the narratives in these, drawing on some of our work in policy and political communication. At the same time, we've started to see the policy responses here. So I think last time I checked, there were 23 US states that have passed deepfake legislation related to politics, more about sort of sexual content. There's been noise by the FEC and the FTC, the FCC, and NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, has launched its AI Safety Institute and Consortium. This is largely in response to the Biden executive order in October of last year, the executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy AI, which devotes some time to synthetic content, sort of deepfakes for their language. And major focus of this content and other legislation that's come up at the national level is technical methods to mitigate the harms of deepfakes. So these technical solutions look like watermarks. Watermarks sometimes include things like visible and invisible labeling. Sometimes we call this fingerprinting, or we embed invisible metadata, try to track the provenance, the origin of images or video. and make that accessible so we know if something is authentic or not. But we have reasons to think that these kinds of technical fixes are not going to be sufficient. So it's been a source of concern for us and the team that the AI Safety Institute, much of this legislation, sort of has the assumption that if we can create deepfake detectors, we've solved the problem. We know if something's a deepfake, we label it, and we're done. But in political communication, in misinformation work, we know that's not fully how the world works. We know things that are obviously misinformation about health or elections, and many people still believe it, regardless of whether you have a fact-checking label up there. We know that labeling content, traditional fact-checking sense, can cause people to double down or even backfire. There's questions about persistence effects. There's questions about subgroup effects, including partisanship influences. So basically, the premise of this work, the motivation here is quite practical. Much of the policy solution says, let's just detect deepfakes and we're done, and we think there's a lot more that needs to be understood here. So we want to examine if we apply different watermarking or labeling strategies, like the ones that have been proposed by the AI Safety Institute, that have been proposed in the executive order, will that increase awareness? Will that increase discernment of AI-generated content? To what extent, if at all, are different strategies, different intensities of strategies effective? Being in the political science and policy space, we do want to be attentive to the role that partisanship plays when an image is negative or favorable towards your politician, congruent with your political story, and other types of possible explanations here. People's media or digital literacy, people's AI knowledge or literacy, as that's changing, how does that play a role? Their trust in the social media platforms that are implementing much of this platform control or intending to implement, perhaps. So do these traits mediate the effectiveness of watermarking and labeling strategies? Okay, so this is a discussion of our experimental design here. So we have a large pre-analysis plan plus as our paper here, and we're hoping to run this a little bit later in this semester, so very much welcoming your feedback, and we'll have a bunch of questions that I think Kaylyn can walk us through. But essentially, we're running a survey experiment. We've created a sort of Twitter-like social media feed using a platform called Otree. So it basically has all the traditional features of a social media platform, likes, replies, shares, images of people, trends. The goal here, of course, is to buttress external validity and to get something closer to behavioral measures. People can actually like and share these kinds of images. So our walkthrough of our basic experiment, we have our pre-treatment, different demographic questions, AI literacy, things like that, screening questions. We block randomize Democrats and Republicans to see different deepfakes. And then they're basically going to get exposed to this Otree Twitter-like social media feed. And we've gathered 100 posts each from Twitter's community page in a few of their major categories. So a sports post, a tech post, a politics post, an entertainment post. They'll see 5 total posts. So they'll see one of each of these real-world, authentic posts. And they'll see one political deepfake from our deepfakes incidents database. So we've been trying to pick what makes sense here. This gives us a really nice comparison between a real political post and a deepfake political post. And I'll turn it over to Kaylyn to walk us through the rest of the design.
Yeah, great. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the political deepfake post. So we are drawing examples from our political deepfakes incidents database. We are going to have probably around 10 options. So one will be randomly selected for each individual in our survey. We're trying to avoid issues where effects might be tied to a particular post or a particular context around that post. And so we are going to display for our control group the image as it's originally intended to be displayed on the social media platform. So the control won't see any watermarking or labeling. A couple of things to note as well about our political deepfake posts. We choose deepfake posts that are targeting a particular political figure, in this case, Donald Trump. And for the time being, we're also focusing on political deepfakes that intend to present the target in a negative light. So in this case, implying that Trump has a strong friendship with Xi and Putin. For individuals in our treatment groups, they'll see watermarks or labels applied. So one treatment group will see the CR mark proposed by the C2PA that's intending to provide information about the content provenance of images. We are working as well to enable individuals to not only see that watermark, but to have a drop-down menu like intended with the CR mark to have information about the origin of the image. For our group that gets information in the form of a content warning, below the image, there'll be displayed information like stay informed, manipulated media, find out more. This is again replicating some of the real world examples of AI-generated content moderation that we're observing on social media platforms. Other groups will see a click-through warning. So with a click-through warning, you initially can't view the image. The individual is displayed this disclaimer, this warning, then they have to actually click on that to view the image. And then we have a combination treatment group where we sort of provide multiple ways to watermark or label content. So you'll see the CR mark, the content warning below, but note as well that the content warning includes information about what deepfakes are and how to spot them. All right, so after the individuals in our survey view the 5 different posts that are presented in a random order on the simulated social media feed, they move on to some survey questions after this. We randomize individuals to get either item count questions or direct questions about particular posts, and we also ask mechanism questions to get at why watermarks or labels might be particularly effective, or why not. So let's talk more about those outcome questions. The item count questions ask the individuals in our survey how many of the images they perceive to be authentic versus AI generated. They have a slider that they can drag the number that they believe to be AI generated versus authentic. We also want them to express their confidence level in making this decision. For the direct questions, we ask about the 2 political posts that individuals view in their feed, the authentic political post and the deepfake political post. I'll note that we do pass all of the political posts from the Twitter community group through a deepfake detector to make sure that they are authentic, so that we really are showing one deepfake and one authentic political post. We ask individuals the extent to which they believe that the post is believable, accurate, authentic, manipulated, AI generated. And we also ask about whether they believe that the event or claim related to that post actually happened, trying to understand perceptions not only of whether content is AI generated, but also gauging their beliefs or understanding about the real world events associated with the information shared. For the mechanism questions, we ask for the individuals in our treatment group whether they found the watermark or label to be clear, informative, helpful, trustworthy, biased, easy to understand. And then we also measure direct clicks on components of the image or surrounding post that individuals use to make their determinations about whether content is AI generated. So if individuals said that the image was manipulated or AI generated, we asked them to click where on the post they found information helpful in making that determination. We might be interested in whether they click on the watermark or the label, whether they click on a part of the image, whether they click on the sharer of the post, or the text that's accompanying the image. We also really care about discernment. So one important aspect is that we care about whether watermarks or labels decrease belief in false content while maintaining individuals' belief in accurate content. So using the political authentic post and the political deepfake post, we calculate individual levels of belief discernment, where we take individuals' ratings on the 5-point Likert scale for the extent to which they believe that the events in the post actually happened, and subtract out the deepfake rating from the authentic rating. But we also care about discernment related to AI content itself. We want to know whether deepfakes that are watermarked or labeled increase awareness of AI-generated content without also raising concerns that authentic content might be a deepfake. So we construct a similar measure regarding AI discernment, but in this case we care about the opposite relationship, where we hope that we're increasing deepfake identification without also without also increasing people's perceptions that authentic content is AI generated. We have some hypotheses that we are forming. As Daniel described, we are sort of in the stages of developing this project further, so we'd love to hear your thoughts as well. We think that watermarks and labels will be effective in increasing perceptions that images are AI generated. They might reduce perceptions, or hopefully they would reduce perceptions that events or claims in posts actually happened. And then we have the hopeful expectation that they might also reduce social media sharing behavior or engagement that we can measure through our simulated social media feed. We also have some expectations regarding treatments compared to one another. We think that the click-through warnings might be even more effective, given that they have this disclaimer before individuals can even view the image. The combination treatment might be especially effective, really providing all of the watermarking and labeling information. And we think that watermarks themselves maybe is a little bit less clear, especially the CR logo, but they might be perceived as more trustworthy. And as we are really trying to understand the socio-political environment in which individuals are encountering watermarks and labels, we have some expectations around how partisanship might mediate individuals' interpretations of deepfakes and watermarking and labeling. So given that we're using negative deepfakes, we think that anti-partisans will be less willing to say that the political deepfake post is manipulated or AI generated because it would be aligned to their priors, aligned to their views about that politician, and they might be more willing to say that the watermarks or labels are biased. All right, so we'll wrap up with some points for feedback. We'd love your thoughts and your expertise. It's great that we have the opportunity to present this in front of an audience that's given a lot of thought to questions such as this. We're still trying to figure out the best criteria to select our political deepfake posts. Some issues here are that we are trying to have a range of target politicians. We've seen a lot coming out pertaining to Biden, Harris, Trump. We're trying to identify whether there might be other candidates that are suitable to include in the post that we show. I mentioned that we're focusing on negative or deepfakes that are meant to portray the target in a negative light, but we also see instances of deepfakes that are meant to boost support for candidates or present them in a positive light, like the one that Daniel mentioned, where Trump was trying to claim support from Swifties. We're grappling with a struggle where some posts are more realistic appearing than others. So that's one thing that we're thinking about. And we're also aware of the fact that some posts might require more political knowledge than others. The post with Trump seeming friendly to Xi and Putin might be something that individuals don't immediately perceive as negative if they don't have a lot of knowledge about the political context. And we also want to hear your thoughts on other ways in which partisanship might mediate how people are responding to watermarks and labels. But with that, I'll wrap it up. We have a QR code to our political deepfakes incidents database if anyone's interested, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. Thanks.
I'll take this up. All right, so feedback, questions, thoughts?
So the comment doesn't answer the question that you asked, but two things that you can think about is demand effect. When you are doing a task and people have to answer because you're expecting them to answer in a specific way. So that kind of demand effect you might capture when you have that kind of experiment. The second thing is also use some sort of placebo for political and non-political fake news. Because if you're thinking about the politicians and image about politicians, how realistic it is, then you might think about how effective is, let's say, with health information or vaccine or something different that's not specifically with politicians, but some maybe political and non-political news as well might help to deal with some of those things.
I can talk about it. I can talk about it. I'm thrilled to see you working on this. It's just it's a question and a thought. The question is, if you have these two measures, the bias and the discernment, one of which looked like it was -1 times the other one, so that seems like mechanically you're good. I was confused. The other is, I'm thinking about sort of other kinds of deepfakes that would be interesting in the political environment. I think we have, like the conversation, a lot of the deepfake conversation has been about these kind of deepfakes of politicians, kind of red team, blue team deepfakes. And I think after the election happens in the United States, my guess is if we're talking about deepfakes, we're going to be talking about deepfakes that are about election administration.
Mm.
So think about a deepfake video of a poll worker destroying ballots or something like that to cast doubt on the validity of the process rather than a scandal about Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. So I think it would be super interesting to think about whether there's differential reactions to kind of process violation deepfakes as opposed to red team, blue team.
Thanks.
But also just attempt to undermine the process rather than beat your opponent.
For sure.
This is a great project, and I wish you success. And I have perhaps some feedback on which images to select for. And I think you might want to maybe have human evaluators, maybe like a different sample, evaluate how realistic the images are. I looked at the appendix and saw some of the images, and a lot of them have the glossy sort of AI-generated look. But then there are lots of probably other images in your database that looks more photorealistic. And another sort of consideration is the idea of like plausibility constraints amongst survey participants in terms of maybe this is a different dimension than whether you think it's AI generated or not, just sort of like the plausibility of the content. Some people might like it or share it, even though it is not plausible, and you can generate so many different things, like you can generate Trump as Henry VIII, but some people might discern that, or people who are maybe not as politically savvy might not be able to discern some of the things that might be implausible in the photos, so maybe that's like another measure that you can get while trying to determine which images to show.
Maybe you can take a few of these.
So one question I had was whether you thought about adding an additional dimension, basically the longer term effect. So to think about, if we were in a panel and come back to those folks, because we've got evidence both from John Bullock and later Adam Berinsky that they show, even when people are exposed to false information and later are told that it's false information, that there still is some evidence that it has lasting effects on views. And so rather than just focusing on the immediate response, if we were able to come back to those people, would we find evidence that seeing those images has an effect, irrespective of whether they know that it's deepfake? Thank you.
Maybe.
Okay, so that's 4. So why don't you start there?
I want to take a couple of these maybe in reverse order before I forget. And so that's a great suggestion, Yotam. So we have somewhere in the PAP itself sort of the idea of the panel study, and I think ways to do this, and a couple preliminary hypotheses, and would love to get thoughts on if these seem like in the right direction. But for example, whether watermarking labeling increases people's AI literacy or knowledge. Do they sort of say, hey, I know what these things are, they seem to work? Do they create persistence in terms of people's beliefs about individual stories or individual incidents if there's a different image? So we have a couple ideas there. It sounds like something that may be worth running, I think.
I can tackle a couple of the other ones.
Yeah.
So great idea on the pilot study about Val. We're definitely planning to evaluate a bunch of candidate images for whether individuals have seen them before, how realistic or plausible the events seem, whether people perceive them as positive or negative, given that's the dimension that we're considering. So love that idea. I love the point as well about deepfakes pertaining perhaps to election administration and process rather than targeting specific individuals. We might need to do a follow-up study on that one, but it's definitely something that we've been thinking about a lot as deepfakes that might really have an impact on the election and people's decisions about whether perhaps to even turn out or whether to to protest or to say that the election results are conflicted.
Can I add one there, Kaylyn?
Yes.
Okay, so also agree that that's a great idea. Thinking about different types of deepfakes, we have some, descriptives on what's most common. So in addition to the sort of the negative ones and the electoral process ones, we might also have, I think this was also your comment, Babel, the expressive ones, the ones that we know they're not real, but we still might like them and share them. Those seem like 3 really interesting classes of deepfakes that we could potentially study beyond just sort of positive versus negative ones.
And then one last comment on the discernment. I didn't mention it on the slide, unfortunately, but we're using 2 different outcome measures for the belief discernment and the AI-generated content discernment. So for belief discernment, we're using the outcome about whether people believe that the events or content of the post actually happened. In that case, we want people to believe that the content happened for authentic posts, but not for deepfake posts. And then for the AI discernment, we're using whether people think that the image is AI generated. And we want people to increase their perceptions that that deepfakes are AI generated, but not increase the perceptions that authentic content is AI generated. And I think that's...
Maybe a comment about mechanisms. We do have these questions about, was it believable, was it accurate? So we'll have some way to track maybe what caused them to do that. I will say we have these sort of click-based outcomes, which are quite exploratory. So we think, maybe where you click on the image, was it the share, was it the date, was it the content of the story, was it the blurry hands? But actually having confidence in how those clicks correspond to beliefs or mechanisms is quite tricky. That's probably something else we'll need to pilot and run some correlations, maybe get their open-ended responses and see if those correspond.
Oh, one last comment on the demand effects point, because that was a really good point. That was the reason behind asking that item count measure rather than diving too quickly into direct measures of people's thoughts about particular posts, thinking that it might be something like a list experiment where people might be able to indicate a number of posts that they think are authentic or AI generated without, perhaps having to reveal that in this area that might evoke some sensitive feelings around how their partisanship mediates their reactions to these posts, as well as the watermarks and labels, that perhaps might give us a better measure of people's willingness to share that information, whereas on the direct measures, we might, not get as truthful of reporting. But of course, love any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, keep these comments for a few minutes. We're going to let Morgan go, and we'll have some time for the other questions and comments. Great work. Thank you.